All right, it's going to be part two to Mainlander and Schopenhauer's philosophy. Hopefully, this humming from this laptop doesn't uh, come on over the audio too much. But he's continuing, this critique and exposition of Schopenhauer's philosophy. So he starts off with at the peak of his fundamental flaws are the occasional causes. In ethics, they become the most blatant occasionalism which Kant brands with the words, "We can presume that no one would accept this system since it has nothing to do with philosophy." Kant is talking about his own philosophy, which has to do with they would consider the thing in of itself, which kind of relates to the core of the will, the core of consciousness. And Kant talked about how the world only exists through our faculty of knowledge, which is kind of like our brain, and he's going to go into that too. But at some point, even the most so-called rational or skeptical or realistic philosopher, at some point, even they, are forced over the line of so-called reality into what would be called transcendentalism. Unapologetically, and you could argue that it comes from an intuition of something more than the world, which is actually the origin of, I would call the true religion. So he says Schopenhauer, however, ignores this warning and writes, generation is, with reference to the begetter, only the expression, the symptom of his decided assertion of the will to live. With reference to the begotten, it is not the cause of the will which appears in him, for the will in itself knows neither cause nor effect. But like all causes, it is merely the occasional cause of the phenomenal appearance of this will at this time and this place. Death overtly presents itself as the end of the individual, but in this individual lies the seed for a new being. The dying goes down, but a seed remains, of which a new being can emerge, which appears in existence now without knowing where he comes from. And that's what I said about part two. People don't know where they come from. That's why we can make up all this bullshit about contracts, you chose your parents, soul life, soul review, I jumped into a body. It's all made up bullshit. Nobody can really validate that beyond the brain. Nobody can validate that because nobody truly really can say they remember what they did before they came into the womb. That's a lie, and that's just a delusion. Like I said, all delusion based on ignorance and confusion and disorientation from birth, because you don't even remember the years from like 1 to 4 at all. So spare me the bullshit. If you were conscious and came to the body conscious, you would be conscious the whole time. If the baby brain is enough to make you stupid, then what's the point of even arguing that? No, fail. So Mainlander is going to expound on this. This means, in dry words, the death of an organism doesn't affect his being. He sinks back into a single will, which becomes, as a working force, a new seed or an egg. What is human can become an oak, a worm, a tiger, or a dying beggar becomes the son of a king. It is almost impossible to grasp that a man which wrote The Shining on Hereditary could have such thoughts. So what he's saying is, and this is the one thing that Schopenhauer either he misrepresented his idea or he unconsciously fell into a sort of a apologetic approach to the reincarnation doctrine because he knew it wasn't literal, but it's almost like Schopenhauer was saying at death, this individual shrinks back into a seed of energy that becomes a new birth, which doesn't really make sense still. It's better to say it sinks back in and is annihilated back into the ocean of this blind will itself, not as an individual wave that's going to reemerge as another wave from its own individuality. And this is what Mainlander's saying. Like, um, he says, it's impossible to grasp that a man could have wrote this if, coming from Schopenhauer, this doesn't seem right. He says, it is as if a Brahmin or a Buddhist priest holds a lecture about reincarnation. But no, reincarnation is a profound support founded on religious dogma, support of morality. So, yeah, reincarnation is really a moral teaching they're teaching to common people, especially the common. You got to think of the most common minded average man who truly, really is not that introspective on existence, they'll teach that to people like that to teach them some kind of morality. Don't do this, you'll go to hell. You'll be reborn in hell. Don't do that, you'll be reborn as a dog. Do this, you'll be reborn in heaven. You'll be rewarded. Be good. All this. Some of it was good intentions. Some of it was it's kind of malevolent to do that. It's trickery. To to kind of confuse people like that anyway. And this is all the confusion from this reincarnation crap. A lot of people, especially now, who are so-called spiritual, or whatever, they fear reincarnation. Some people don't want to. They don't want to come back here, and they're scared. They don't want to reincarnate. And they don't know what to do. Everybody's all up in arms about this reincarnation crap, which, like I said, is really just dogma for morality. It's not real. No, there's no billions of different souls around here waiting for new bodies. Um, so yeah, like Mainlander points out very wisely and sharply, it's a morality doctrine. So even he understood this. And what I'm noticing too, a lot of these German pessimists, they actually understand the Eastern philosophy of pessimism more so than the people who are caught up in their religion. It's interesting. I'm noticing that they have a more sober, intelligent understanding of it. Because the religious people just it's just funny. So he goes on. Schopenhauer, however, knows no retribution after death, and life in this world can be the only possible punishment for the will. So he's explaining that, yeah, retribution, like going to hell. He's like, no, this is the hell. This is the punishment of the will. The will manifests in this shithole here, and it's the punishment. And he also Schopenhauer also goes into how death is you could be considered justice for this will um, wanting to exist. So certainly it is true that all future oaks stem from present oaks, and all future humans stem from present humans in a completely natural way. I have all reason to assume that Schopenhauer leaned his absurd occasionalism on the exceptionally important karma doctrine. That's what I said. I feel like that too. Schopenhauer he wasn't too clear on that. Like I said, he made it seem as if the individual seed will still exist, and although he admitted a new intellect and a new body, a new person, he acted as if the seed was individual, which is not. It's the blind will itself, the ocean of the blind will. On another occasion, Schopenhauer also talks boldly and confidently about an existence which has nothing to do with the existence of one will. He says, the horrors upon the stage hold up to him the bitterness and worthlessness of life, thus the vanity of all its struggle. The effect of this impression must be that he becomes conscious, if only an obscure feeling, that it is better to tear his heart free from life, to turn his will from it, to love not the world nor life, whereby then in his deepest soul the consciousness is aroused that for another kind of willing there must also be another existence. Behind our existence lies something else, which is only accessible to us if we have shaken off the world. I believe that at the moment of death we become conscious that it is a mere illusion that has limited our existence to our person. Death and birth are the constant renewal of the consciousness of the will, in itself without end and without beginning, which alone is, as it were, the substance of existence. But each such renewal brings a new possibility of the denial of the will to live. That's like 4 different quotes from Schopenhauer. So, like where he says, at the moment of death, we become conscious of the mere illusion. Mainlander is saying, well, whoa. He's like, well, you made a leap. I thought you said, that death is death, and now you're saying we're going to become more conscious after we die as an individual. I would say that if you want to put it poetically, you could say that the will is, in a sense, liberated from itself at the death of the individual, but the individual does not still maintain individuality at death of the individual. That's an oxymoron. And that's why he's going into this. He's like, well, what did he really mean? So, every genius or even poet, mystic, goes into the realm of the unknown and tries to explain things from that, which could be considered a neutral standpoint, because he says behind our existence lies something else, and that's what all the sages talk about. You can consider that non-dual versus this duality. The non-dual is what is behind duality, I would say. So So Mainlander's gonna again comment. This fluctuating between imminent area and at the same time existing transcendental area, this oscillating which until now no philosopher could escape from, in which my philosophy has finally brought to an end, and his vain struggle to bring both areas in harmony are in no passage as clear as this one. So he's gonna put another Schopenhauer quote. One can also say that the will to live represents itself in only manifestations, which totally become nothing. This nothing stays, however, together with the manifestations within the will to live and rest on its basis. This is actually in the Buddhist too, like Nagarjuna, and some people may be familiar with that. But all they say is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. That's kind of what Schopenhauer is saying. And Mainlander is commenting that, well, okay, that's transcendental, but didn't you say that we could discuss these things as philosophers? Now, I would grant some truth to this because I do kind of understand where Schopenhauer is coming from. Like I said, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. That's what he's really saying. Um, but then even Mainlander admits that he is at least so honest to add that this is admittedly obscure. So it is obscure, but something in Schopenhauer tells him that there's something to that concept that without this existence, is there something or is there nothing? Uh, the most hardcore materialists would say there's nothing, but even the most hardcore, spiritualists, I would say there's no thing, which is everything. So you can, play with those concepts. But then he goes on to say, of course, for the transcendental Schopenhauer, not the moment of procreation, but the moment of death is the most important of life. About death, he speaks with a highly solemn, anointing tone, like Kant does with conscience. Schopenhauer here. Death is the great opportunity to no longer be I. Blessed him who uses it. In the hour of death, it is decided whether the man returns into the womb of nature or belongs no more to nature at all. But for this opposite, we lack image, conception, and word. The death of the individual is, in each case, the unweariedly repeated question of nature to the will to live. Hast thou enough? Wilt thou escape from me? In this spirit are the Christian provisions for the suitable employment of the hour of death by means of exhortation, confession, communion, and the last unction. Hence also the Christian prayers for deliverance from sudden death. Dying is certainly to be regarded as the real aim of life. In the moment of death, all that is decided, for which the whole course of life was only the preparation and introduction. So, Mainlander comments, Schopenhauer as a human stands before suicide without prejudice, which I greatly appreciate. Only cold, mindless, or in dogma trapped people can condemn a self-murderer. Blessed are we all that by a mild hand a door has been opened through which we, when the heat in the sultry saloon of life becomes unbearable, I think he meant heat, can enter the quiet night of death. So he's talking about suicide. This is a touchy topic too, and even see, the thing with suicide is birth is death any fucking way. So people who always promote life, like if killing yourself is wrong, then giving birth is wrong because it's a death sentence. It's manslaughter, isn't it? I mean, people are just picking and choosing. But if you really look at it soberly, to live is you're living knowing you're gonna die, and yet this is not suicide. So people make up shit like God's timing, God's gonna take me away. Like, get the fuck out of here. What kind of God's gonna take you away so rudely and painfully? And damn that God. Anyway, that's stupid. I mean, so I would more side with these guys. I mean, you're really more respectable to leave on your own damn accord than to wait for nature to tear you up. Nature is rude as hell. It's like I said, look at the animal kingdom. Animals being eaten alive. Nature gives not two fucks. And if the God who made that system is that's what you're waiting on to take you out, yeah, right. That's not divine. So he's saying like only a cold, mindless, dogma trap people condemn a self-murderer, and that goes into that book Ever Deeper Honesty when he talks about people. Really, why people tell people that is because they want you to stay here so they can be used. That's what it really is about. People are pernicious. The human ego is pernicious. It really is. It's wicked. It's subtly wicked. So he says this philosopher Schopenhauer, without any sound foundation, brands suicide as a useless act. He believes the suicidal should not hope for liberation from death and can't save himself with suicide, only with false pretense The cold orchis lures him as a port of rest. The self-murderer denies only the individual, not the species. Suicide is the random annihilation of a single manifestation, which, undisturbed, continues to exist as thing in itself. So this is where he attacked Schopenhauer, and this is why I had a problem with Schopenhauer too. I thought he was being a little conformist, even though he was being sober in most of his writings on suicide. It's kind of like he gave in to some bias with that statement. So Mainlander said this is false. Like Schopenhauer ex tripodi explains, the will is metaphysical, the intellect physical. Well, everybody clearly shows us that the whole idea is annihilated. This way he handles suicide. He acts as if he knows exactly from surest possible source, has experienced what happens with the self-murderer after death. The truth is that the self-murderer as thing in itself is annihilated in death like every organism. Does he not live forth in other bodies? Then the death is absolute annihilation. In other cases, he lives forth. So Mainlander wants to clear that up and say, well, no, there's no difference. And he also continues to say, well, if you read in one of Schopenhauer's Volume 1, World is Will Representation, how suicide by a thorough asceticism, chosen hunger death should have a different result than normal suicide. And one will be astonished about the errors of a great genius. So what he's saying is, yeah, like I was saying, like, so some ascetics actually will, when they're ready to leave, they'll just starve themselves to death, because they understand the world. There's no people always try to ascribe some higher command from this life, and it's nothing but our own will. It's the will of the creatures themselves, intrinsic within every creature. There's no responsibility to a so-called power in the sky that is above us. It's you doing all the creating, the procreating, and the dying. So you have the choice if you want to cease this or not. And the ascetic knows that. So they leave on their own accord. And he's saying, well, if they can do that as ascetic, why are you, being biased towards someone who does it in normal society? There's really no difference. And there is not. So he's saying, well, that's kind of one of the errors of Schopenhauer, who was a genius nonetheless. Um, his subtle bias. So that was part 2 to Mainlander, exposition on Schopenhauer. Might do a little more on Mainlander also. Peace.